before I introduce tonight's guest, point out a couple events. This is the second to the last of our Voices lectures. The last one will be the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Two young Puerto Rican and U.S. Political status of Puerto Rico is confusing. Artists Alora and Calzadilla will be speaking on their projects, some of which are large-scale social projects in city centers. Others are museum-based, and they just have several projects developed at the Tate Modern, so they're rapidly doing shows all over the world. And really young, dynamic people, so I think you'll enjoy it. And I'm sorry it's right before Thanksgiving, but hopefully you'll be here. Next week we open the second to the last of the At the Edge shows. Little City is doing Little City is a foundation for developmentally disabled adults, and they have an artistic program. Artists have been working there for years. We've made a project called Alert, Please Proceed to a Shelter Nearest You. It's going to be a great show, and that opens on Wednesday night, so hopefully you can come see that. So those are just my two plugs. And I want to tell you a little bit about Marjetica, whose Slovenian name is not Marjetica, but I cannot pronounce it in Slovenian, so I'll call her Marjetica. Who actually gave a small talk for another group last night, which was great. So we're actually getting another version of that talk, so she's working overtime here at UIC, so I'm very appreciative to be here. She's going to tell you a little bit about her work, and then of course she'll describe some projects, but I think it's good for you to have her work situated. So for the last decade or more, she's been observing, researching, and recreating human-built environments as examples of self-sufficiency and self-expression, what she refers to as creative adaptation. In a time when the social state is in decline and the inequitable distribution of the world's wealth and resources prevails, billions of people survive each day in overcrowded shantytowns, unauthorized favelas, and improvised settlements. These invisible cities are found in most of the world's major cities and serve as both a source of inspiration and as site for many of her projects around the world. She will discuss issues of security, privacy, and safety in informal cities, and her most recent project in Caracas, Venezuela. And I've also asked her to kind of speak to, well, she's very interested in speaking about the border or lack of border between art and life, but I've also asked her to talk about how her projects function in museums, because they're very much based on real-life case studies. And then she's also done some projects on-site, very different museum projects. Just a little bit about her exhibition history. She's based in Ljubljana, Slovenia. Works all over the world. Has had shows at the Sao Paulo Biennale, this year's Venice Biennale, Sculpture Project Münster, Manifesta 3, the Guggenheim Museum, Künstlerhaus Bethel in Germany, and many, many more. Received numerous awards and grants, including one from the Pollock-Krasner Foundation in 93 and 2, actually, 93 and 99. The Parque de la Memoria Sculpture Prize from Buenos Aires in 2000. Studio program of the Künstlerhaus Bethel in Berlin in 2000, and the Hugo Boss Prize from the Guggenheim Museum in 2000 as well. So we're very, very fortunate to have you here tonight. Please help me welcome Marjetica Potrc.
For some reason I know quite a few professors who teach here, and today I was really happy to see the show of Kelly Marshall, who is also my friend, and I want to say that I was very pleased the way he shows experimentation of his practice. So he showed many styles and many approaches to the same thing he's interested in. I'm somehow very similar to him. I let myself develop all the time. And for today's talk, I will show you a few examples of my own work, and then which I show in the museums, as Lorelai said. Then a project which I have done recently in Caracas, Venezuela, which is on-site project in a barrio. And then I will show actually a research I have done in Caracas about the city of Caracas, which is a lot about informal economy and informal dwelling. And I'll try to show, I'll also show some examples from Belgrade, Yugoslavia, and at the end link it with the West Bank. This is a recent project that I'm developing now for the RCA in Florida. They will also publish a catalog where I have a talk with A.L. Weisman, who is an architect from Israel, and is interested in same issues as me. So let's see. Shantytowns and gated communities. A good example would be Johannesburg after the fall of apartheid, when the city exploded in shantytowns and imploded in gated communities. So many people somehow retreated in islands and took great security about their environment. I was also very much attracted to the fact that half of the population in the global city today are more or less shantytown dwellers. As you see, people come in the city, this is, I think it's Buenos Aires, and they build their improvised dwellings themselves, which means they take care of their living situation themselves. They don't rely on city structures or governmental structures or support. Of course, I'm not talking only about people who are on the move, like immigrants, but also people like me and many more who travel all the time around the world. And if you are a person who is on the move, you need much less than you think you have to have, like a big house or whatever, but it's very good to be self-reliant. And this is one I show at the Venice Biennial this year. I show a set of objects that are about self-reliance, which means this is a clockwork mobile telephone, telephone charger, and when you link up the handle, you can charge up your mobile, which means you don't really rely, you don't have to plug in your telephone into the electricity line. And this is exactly how I think about cities. Cities are like architectural form, but then on another side you have infrastructure, and I'm most interested in infrastructure. I think that today development really goes through infrastructure much faster than through forms. It's typical, like how Lorelei introduced myself, that I'm very much interested in shantytowns, but of course I'm interested in the forms of temporary architectural forms everywhere. And this is an example of which I built in Basel earlier this year, of a Nijrhein house, which is a case study from suburbia of Utrecht in the Netherlands. I was personally very attracted to the fact, so it's like a new development, and among the residential buildings that you see here in the back, the city planners or the city regulators of this area, they allowed a space which doesn't belong to anyone, which means it was reserved there so that let's say travelers or gypsies could come and settle there. which they did. That's a house of a gypsy who settled on this site which didn't belong to anyone. It was very interesting for me to see that he immediately put a wall around his home, and the structure, when you come close, you see it's a caravan. A caravan which was deposited there, it's put on stilts, but actually it looks like a typical Dutch house. So this is also what I'm interested in archetypal architecture, and I will show you today during my talk quite a few examples about it. Now, what I consider is, okay, I come from Ljubljana, Slovenia, which was a part of Eastern Europe, and where I lived in, I had the luxury to live in a very well-organized social state, which is now over, as I think it's a very difficult situation all over the world that we don't live in social state anymore. And in this new situation, what is most important is not public space, but private space, and this means also our emphasis on security and self-sustainability. So I'll show you now a few examples of a typical work which I exhibit in a museum or in a gallery. What I usually do is I take a real-life situation someplace. On the left side you see Barefoot College, an example of a Barefoot College house, which is a settlement in India, which is actually more or less self-sustainable. The roofs collect water. They store it in the tanks below houses, which makes actually the settlement can survive without the water provided by the city. But also they are very known to use solar panels, and actually they export, it's very funny, they export solar panels to villages like in the mountains, in the Himalaya mountains. For me it was very interesting to get to know the director of the Barefoot College. He came to New York last year and we had a presentation together, and for me it was great to see that we were talking the same language, as it is very beautiful to see that I have very similar ideas with Aaron Weisman, the Israeli architect who's interested in territories and zones or temporary zones in the West Bank. I talked about it later. Here is another example, which is a reconstruction of a house from the rural studio in Alabama. Probably many of you know the practice, which was actually launched by Samuel Mockbee and envisioned Samuel Mockbee and his partner envisioned at the time that students could work on site in rural Alabama and build small-scale houses for the rural population there. What was very beautiful for me when I visited the site afterwards, when I already built two houses from their practice. This is a case study which I did in Vienna, at the Art Collection in Vienna. When I came there, I understood why the rural studio practice was so successful. Actually, the landscape where the houses are, or the settlements are, is very Arcadian. It's actually, you define, you and the land define each other. You see beautiful landscape, green landscape, small houses, and everything is based on like human level. So what you see are actually houses that are that students that build houses mostly do it for a family. They talk with them, and then they also make like a very imaginative design, which I love, like using recycled materials for walls or for windows. For instance, they would use car tires for walls of a building, or car windows instead of windows for a structure. Of course, I never actually follow exactly what architects do, but I try to keep the concept or the message of the architectural practice or the case study. So in this particular example, the roof is very important. It's a butterfly house named after the roof, which has two wings and actually connects water, rainwater. So I told construction team in Vienna that they should emphasize on the roof, and they should find some material which is tin, but it's not tin bought in the shop, but it's tin that is recycled material. And they were able to find a lot of street signs in Vienna. So we came into the gallery and you could see Vienna, Graz, Vienna, I don't know, Munich and so on. It was, I think it was a very successful piece.
From inside you will see the language?
No, yeah, that's in the museums. I never, yeah, but it's not a very good photo, but it was very bright blue thing. So in the museums, I never let people walk into the houses, but whenever I build in the city, like recently, I'm making quite a few projects in the city. I have a very different strategy, so I'll talk a little bit about that. In the museums, I close the door so you are able to see the house from the outside and think about it in the context of your city, let's say. So if you would go inside, it would have be too psychological. I think it's an overload of information. What I do usually is always I put a wall label on the wall explaining that this is a case study from this and this place. I've been actually very fortunate and happy that all these places whose case studies are shown in the museum and galleries responded very positively to my presentations of their cases. Because of course I come from Eastern Europe and I was never really concerned about authorship rights, so I never asked anyone permission. So we contacted them last year when I made a project called Urban Independent, which actually you can also see on my website, which I made together with the Creative Town from New York. So we contacted like 5 of the places which I showed, and they all responded back. So we got this real life information back from them. As for the project that I'm doing in cities, I actually totally hate to put a piece that would stay there forever and you would have to look at it in the next 20 years, it would look the same. So, because I want my work to change, like obsessively, I'm changing all projects obsessively. If I, for instance, I will show you a few examples afterwards. If this building would be reconstructed someplace else, it would look different, but the concept would remain the same. Like I let people, let curators choose the color, also the building materials, but also, it's not important if there are 3 or 4 solar panels, but there should be some solar panels. So in the city, I ask curators or the institution that invites me or a city that invites me to find a private space and to make addition to a private home. Like for the Istanbul Biennial this summer, I asked them to find a flat roof, and I made actually, I was very fascinated by Jonas Friedman's architecture, drawings about screen architecture. So I made a project somehow thinking about Jonas Friedman's drawings. And we put a roof on a private flat roof. I put another tin roof on another flat roof in Istanbul. And after the end of the biennial, which will be this week, the family will just build up the walls. And in this way, I will have documentation of how my project grows, but is also taken by private people, which means I give my projects, I think, a life of their own, which I like. But of course, a lot of projects are about sustainable technologies. This is actually how usually I start my talks, because it's a very clear example how I work. I would find a source image, which in this case is an image from Honduras, which I found in the National Geographic magazine, and then I sent very easy instructions how to build it, and this was built in the Minster in '97. So you can see, I don't pretend to sit in my studio and think about which kind of material, the dimension, and so on. I actually, what I would like, okay, I don't know, yeah, so what I told you once again was before that the curators can decide, or construction workers decide on materials many times. I'm showing this case also for a reason, because I show you now a few examples of core units, and which link actually my museum work with a project which I have done recently in Caracas. So this is the core unit, and I have built quite a few, which is actually a very small functional building, which is equipped with electricity, water, and sewage, and nothing else. So if you are a shantytown dweller and come to move into the city, you get this infrastructural unit, then you build your own home around it, the way you want it and the way you envision it. I think that's a very beautiful example of collaboration between the city and people who move in fast-growing cities. This is another example. This is actually a piece which I did in the Guggenheim Museum. I found information in the New York Times, and it's a case study from Johannesburg, what the city built after the fall of apartheid. They really wanted to come to accommodate thousands of millions of people who were without decent homes. They actually followed the same logic. But in a little bit different form. They would build like an open structure, provide, as you here see the toilet, seat and water connection, and then people themselves would build their environment inside this frame. Now I've told you before that I'm very much interested in growing structures. Recently I've been on a project in Caracas which researches the growing forms of cities. Now, I think it's interesting because I'm not really working as an architect, but as someone who is sharing, like perhaps who has opinions about what is interesting in architecture today or in cities that we are living. For me it was very interesting that the Caracas case project, which I was a part of, was funded by the German Cultural Foundation that is now supporting financially with a lot of money two projects. One is a project about growing cities, and one is a project about shrinking cities. And shrinking cities, actually, Detroit is also a part of it. Hyong Park, I'm not promoting, is very much involved in the project, but also the cities in Eastern Germany that are more or less vacant now after the political changes are also part of this research. So I found it beautiful that there is a lot of money given to projects that are not researching in the stable form, but something which is moving and which is growing or dissolving. So like actually embracing the temporary condition of cities. Actually, how I deal with it in my practice, I have now two examples to show you. The East Baghdad, this is East Baghdad upgrading program, which actually received other kind of awards for architecture. And the city did the same, it's the same basic thing like I've shown in Honduras. There was a shantytown called East Baghdad, and the city decided to build utility core units. This is one example of that. And then residents themselves upgraded their environment so functionally and beautifully that the project received Aga Khan Award of Architecture 10 years afterwards, which means that I have this is my personal stand, that people can help themselves very well. So you don't need as an architect to think that you have to take care of people. So these are examples that I actually love, the whole units, this infrastructure. This is how this is the whole unit which I built in Vienna, in the museum in Vienna. I'll show you two more examples. This is the same whole unit which we built in Miami, and this one we built in Oberlin. Actually, Oberlin College bought a piece, which means they bought a certificate. In this manner, I ensure that the pieces can always change. It started actually very simply because it doesn't make sense to transport cinder blocks, for instance, from one part of the world to the other. So, you know, you never can really make the same dimension. It doesn't really make sense. But then I said, okay, but if the curator wants another color, you can just put it on. And that's very interesting because the questions that you get from curators are many times very formal. They would say, which color? And I would say, okay. Then I said, okay, terrible. Now, if I say red color, he will say, which red color? And then I just decided, I said, choose any happy red color you want. So this is the Miami. Oh, sorry. This is over here. Also, you see, for instance, we decided to just upgrade the structures more. Actually, there is this piece is unique right now because it grows with each and every installation. There is a new architectural piece, either infrastructure or form which is added to the structure. It started, it's called Duncan Village Core Unit. It's again one of the core units. It was built at the Northern Harbor Gallery in Berlin, I think 1 or 2 years ago. It's a very simple brick structure with just one solar panel on the top. Now for the next exhibition, this is in Karlsruhe, we put up a big water barrel as a statement. Also the satellite dish for communication. And in Art Basel this summer we added a shed. Now I have already 2 more exhibitions scheduled with this piece, and eventually I guess it will really become a village. So each of those people who want to exhibit this, they need that they add a new part of it. But actually, you know, I think that museums or gallery spaces really also like the challenges. It's not only putting a piece someplace and, you know, just secure the lighting. I think it's great. Anyway, you have to deal a lot with materials and construction team. So it's not a big deal to be creative also in another place. Now, so far I showed you the case studies and how I, from real life, and how I worked with them in the museums. I actually consider museums and galleries as a public space, and contemporary art, something which should be about contemporary issues, whatever you want. I think it's very important that contemporary art is grounded as it's in naming, in here and now. And of course, because I deal with cities and infrastructure, this is how I plug in. When I came to Caracas, we made a lot of projects there. It was a group of perhaps 10 people, urban anthropologists, architects. I was an artist, a photographer, and so on. Many different people from all over the world, Japan, Brazil, I don't know what, Mexico. And we, of course, I also made research, which I will show you later with some images, what I found interesting. But also I insisted from the very beginning that we should, me and Lia Tesapo, an Israeli architect with whom I worked on the project, that we should make a hands-on project in the city. So not just observe from far away, but really to get involved with the situation there. The city of Caracas is a city of 6 million people. More than half of them live today in shantytowns, which are called in Caracas barrios. And actually, it's quite interesting that 10 or 15 years ago they were not even put on the map, but today they are recognized and slowly getting legalized. which means that, you know, people who live there at the end of the story, they will be able to have a credit card, that most of you have. One of the things that is really very interesting about the barrios is that people build houses first, and then they think about infrastructure. It's the opposite of what developers do here in America. First, here you lay infrastructure, streets, and all utilities, networks, and then you build houses. Here is the opposite. So actually, what was really, what is of course very important for me is that the barrios are self-upgraded structures. People take care of their built environment themselves. So the infrastructure, which of course is offered by the city to people who live in the barrios, doesn't work. It just doesn't fit this like a beehive structure which grows and changes constantly. It's also interesting not only that the barrios were not presented on the maps, but it's very, very difficult to approach, to make maps on a structure which changes all the time. Recently they've been discussing this constantly. Okay, so the way how they made maps of the barrios was they would fly a huge balloon with a camera at the bottom, just above the shantytowns, and in this way they scanned the situation. This is how they were able to make the maps. But 2 years afterwards, the situation is totally different. It changes. So when we got contacts in the barrios and we walked around and we were just shown the situation there, I had an idea, because I'm interested in infrastructure, of course, to test my ideas. It was very somehow funny, simple idea, how to test if my ideas really work on the real ground. And I didn't have any ambition to build a dry toilet there, which is what you are looking at, which in a way is a core unit. But I was thinking perhaps more about wind energy or something. It eventually turned out that we got in contact with an architect from New York who came and gave a few presentations in the city. And people from the former city, but also from the informal city, totally loved her ideas. And the idea was very simple. Okay, if you don't have a water on very high up on the mountain, then you build a dry toilet which doesn't need any water. Now, the situation in the barrios is like this. Most of the electricity is stolen from the former city, which means more than half of the population steal the electricity from the grid. And when we asked them whether they would like to have perhaps solar panels, they said, no, we don't need it, we have the electricity. So it's very funny how people think about this possibilities and also what they should get. But the water, it's a big problem in Caracas. The level of the water in cities reservoirs are, dramatically low. So it's a huge problem for the whole city. As for barrios, if you live in a barrio, you get water twice per week and sometimes only during the night. So it's really sort of dramatic. We built, after getting involved with the community, which actually helped us a lot with the project, we decided to, we got in contact with a family or a woman whose house is here. I think I have another slide to show you. She lives here alone with 2 kids, and she built the house herself. She doesn't have the toilet and she doesn't have the running water. And we were able to obtain the grant from the Ministry of Environment of Venezuela to build 2 toilets in the city of Caracas. So this is one example. How it works actually. The toilet seat comes in 2 parts, and the urine is diverted as a fertilizer to the plants, what you see here. It does not stink or anything. I didn't know it myself, but we didn't have the fertilizer. As for the hard seat, it just decomposes. There are 2 chambers under here, and one is used half a year, one another half a year. this is just an overview of the situation where the toilet is. Also, you see that this house is this is typical building techniques on the very high up on the barrios where people settle. So the houses are built just with steel or with mud. This is actually mud up on sticks. And so the dry toilet looks like a beautiful joy. And this is actually from the same situation looking down. This is the barrio when we built the dry toilet is a neighborhood of 200,000 people. So it's huge. What was very important for us was that the family and the community embraced the project. So that's the house next by. This is the owner of the house. And these are two of the three construction workers that now know how to build the dry toilet. And it's actually very beautiful that they will be able, there is a lot of positive response in the press, but also for the institutions like Hidrocapital, which is the main municipal water institution. And they are actually now making an educational video about the project. So the institutions and the communities that are actually part of that are supposed to have different visions, they see the project is excellent and they will try to continue to implement it. For us it was very important that there is not a wide idea to build 200 dry toilets. It wouldn't work. But we said, okay, you can get perhaps a small grant, and the way you build up your house, you can also build your own toilet if it works. And it seems it will work very well. For us, it's also very beautiful that the construction workers are now getting the business. So we also started a small business to flourish in the area, which is really dramatically without suffering unemployment. So actually, it's sort of funny for me that I built so many cool units or these toilets before in the museums, and now I built a real one, which was a success story. So I'm very, very happy about it. It also tells you something about the condition that one just has to follow. I mean, it's fun all the time. Now I will show you a few examples. Now this is not my work anymore, but I show you, I think, very interesting examples from the city of Caracas and some cases from Belgrade and also new ideas from Israel, from the west side. As I told you before, the city of Caracas is now in a political and social crisis. Actually all the problems are just popped up. They are exposed and they become quite epic. It's perhaps similar with the West Bank, which we also can consider a space in crisis. But the problems that are exposed there and become very, also for some people very emotional, even critical about them, then actually me and Ira Weissman, when we talked about it, we both agreed that actually these big examples can be very illustrative of also what is happening in any cities today. It's just that, for instance, in Europe or in a city like Chicago, it's not so visible because it's more, it's in this territory. So the city of Caracas really flourished in the 70s when they were exporting oil. But today, for some reason, it's the government is not seems doing a good job. And this is how the situation looks. The billboards, advertisement billboards are empty, and informal economy is actually blossoming. Just because we were talking about the situation in the barrios, more than 60% of the buildings in the barrios are sold as informal economy. You don't own the land, of course, but you build something there and then you just resell it to newcomers. For me, what was very interesting was that the street sellers are actually a great success in the city of Caracas. The highways, which has the ultimate public space in Caracas where people merge and you have people driving along, I mean all sorts of classes driving together, is actually spotted with street sellers that on their movement is quite strategic. Like they would move onto the highways when the traffic stops, and then they would retreat. So I will talk about the movement, also different examples. Recently I heard that a few big companies in Caracas are actually hiring street sellers, and they are so that they sell their goods, which means that they acknowledge that the informal economy can work very well. Like yesterday, I thought about one very good example how sometimes architects think about the barrio. They say, okay, the barrio is like a parasite, or informal city is like a parasite on the formal city. Until the formal economy would collapse, so would the barrios. But what happened here in Caracas is that when the formal economy is going down, the informal economy is blossoming, and it's actually doing a great job. Now, of course, everything looks very much improvised and also strategic, also very aggressive. The city center turned into a ground where many street sellers put their desks and whatever. Then the vendors, they sell everything which is possible. So you have to remember that 10 years ago this was like perfect, formal, beautiful city. And now it's just occupied by street sellers that come there, put the stands during the day and then retreat during the night. And the same happens with the public space. We discussed this a lot. You know, like big boulevards or big city squares, they are actually appropriated not by all the public, because the public is in the city is divided in two, like people who are living the barrios and people who live in the former city. Now I'm being a little bit simplistic, but that's it. But then you have groups that have the same interest, and then they occupy the space. It can be celebration, demonstration, or whatever. This is how they market. So they invade sort of the space, they market, and they appropriate it, and then they retreat again. It was very interesting that this is actually demonstrations that Chavez had. As you see, people just climb on the street lamps and drink beer. Actually, it was like a total happening. It reminded me very much on the Rav Parade in Berlin. So it's not it's a demonstration, but demonstration that really includes pursuit of happiness, if you would like to say. It's not so much about the political statement. So I started to talk now about invasions, and there are quite a few invasions that are happening today that people themselves call invasions. One of them is invasion by the rural situation into the urban situation. I'm talking now about the urban farm, which was built by the Chavez government in the very city center. Actually, this used to be a big public park, which is now transformed into the urban agriculture cooperative, where they planted lettuce and green and red peppers, and actually selling the goods to the public. So you can pass by, you buy a salad or paprika there. I must tell you that this is actually once again the very city center, where this one of the most interesting buildings from the modernism are here behind Park Central, which actually took the name from Central Park in New York. This is another business building, and here on the left side that you don't see, it's a Hilton Hotel. So for me it was very funny that they were actually planting the vegetables in circles. And when we asked them why they plant vegetables in circles, they told us that these people who actually have offices there and live in these buildings, they will find it more acceptable because they live in formal city. So it was great. So this is how the park looks now, right now. And of course, once again, I would like to say that people who live in these buildings, they consider this a real invasion. They don't like the urban agriculture centered in the very city center. Personally, I think that this is actually a project which is perhaps too utopian. It's a project that perhaps architects from the 60s would like to make then. Today you have to know that the United Nations Program for Redevelopment of cities, they actually advise that cities like Cairo would have small-scale urban agriculture. So it's like a mix. It's like I told you before, it's a mix between formal and informal economy, but also here between the rural and the urban, which can seem out in the next slide. Now, what we also discovered on the research is that actually people don't really care about public space. And I have a few examples on perhaps a bigger scale. This is a national park actually not in Caracas, but near the seaside, where people settled. So they just disregarded the fact that this is a national park. They came there, they burned, again, invasion, which is cutting and burning trees, then marking the territory, as you see, and then building houses. It was very, this actually is also a quite interesting case study, because the clans, the families who live on the top of the hill, they oversee the situation below in the valley. So they would cut and burn woods, and then they would plant corn, and then they would see if nothing would happen. If they are able to collect corn, then they can build houses. So it's a really aggressive strategy. This is how it works on the level of the city. Now we looked at before it was a national park. This is the land of the city, which is owned by the city. Yeah, it's not privately owned land. And the city grows very, very fast. It grows with what we also everyone refers to Caracas as invasions. If you decide to settle in the city, you actually negotiate the space with communities, and usually just people build more and more up and more into the nature. You cut the land, and you make a space for your building. It can be anything. But also it's very interesting to note that these kind of structures upgrade themselves very fast. They turn into concrete building blocks and clay building blocks in a few years. So this is actually, you see here the raw effect of occupying the space if you want. Now, from the side here, you can see difference in colors. This is like the first phase, which is already completed. This is actually quite a regulated shantytown. These are all invasions, and this is the land which is waiting for invasion. There is also, I have like a very fine example of a house which we also researched, which I called the growing house. Now, I told you before that barriers grow, that they change all the time, but also what is most important is that all of the houses actually sprout, or 90% of them, they showcase the armor, the steel rods, like a continuation of the building. Nearly 90% of the houses show how the idea that they want to, not that they want to remain the same, but that they want to grow. And this is a house which started as a very small house for a family, like 3 or 6 meters, something like this, and perhaps like till the door even smaller, probably something like this. And it now became like a huge mansion. I started, okay, they showed us also examples how they grew the house. They claimed the territory horizontally and vertically. So they would, for instance, the house would be here, and then they would just build a wall like 3 meters from the house, in this way claiming the territory. It's only after perhaps 1 year that they would roof the building. The same strategy goes into up, not just horizontally but also vertically. This is actually a very fun example because the electrical pole that you see here was, of course, originally on the other side of the street and is today incorporated in the middle of the house. This is how it looked when I came to Caracas, the house, and in a few months they already made the second floor. The owner of the house, she was complaining that now it became really dangerous with all the electrical wires, so she was worried how she would build the third floor. But for me, what's interesting here is a certain disregard about public utilities, if you want. This is not an example from Caracas, but from Belgrade, which is, Belgrade is also after the political changes in the 1990s. It grew incredibly fast, but the city couldn't really have the dwellers or the inputs of the population that landed on the city, so they just let people solve their problems themselves. And again, individuals became very aggressive, as you see in this case. This guy wanted to have the balconies, but if there was a lamp, it was not a big problem for him. But also, so you have like huge shantytowns, like I think it's one of the biggest shantytowns in the Balkans today. But also what I found personally very like striking were the two houses which I saw very clearly from the bridge. And the two guys who built the houses on the top of already existing houses, they thought that people wouldn't be able to see them because when you walk here, you don't see the houses because they're somehow retreated a little bit. But from far away from the bridge, you could see very clearly a typical, very archetypal Balkan house sitting on the top, like with a garden. You see, I have some other slides which actually show also the plants growing. So for me, this structure, I always identified this kind of building with let's say, rural population in Serbia. A very typical unit, family unit, but here it became a statement, it became like a rural imposition on the formal city. Actually, I also have a continuation of this story because the city itself, they thought after a couple of years that this is a little bit too much for the image of Belgrade itself. So they negotiated with people who live in the two houses to either put the houses down or to do something about it. So now the situation is like this, that the guys who live in the houses, they even made one story more, and here in the front there is a huge wall. So it's actually they enclose themselves from the view of the city. This is another archetypal imagery that emerged in Belgrade. A lot of houses that I saw were built by individuals, are built in the archetype of, let's say, top security. Actually, we could say that these are the beautiful modernist bay windows that somehow turned into the turrets that you see that we identify with castles, medieval castles. So again, if you take, if you start to build your buildings yourself in the very aggressive situation, you also adapt this kind of experience. So its privacy and security is emphasized. actually, I also realized that how the democratic space, which Venezuelans were very proud of, turned into what I call defense architecture today. What I'm showing you on the left side is Villanueva's architecture. It's UCV, University of Venezuela in Caracas, and actually it's under United Nations protection. It's considered an architectural monument. And when Villanueva built the canvas, which is quite huge, he really introduced this floating and shared space of modernism. And modernism, in my view, really tried to visualize democracy. Now, so it's beautiful but nothing changed there because it's considered to be a monument. So I actually associated this kind of university shared space, like democratic space, with a modernist villa, which you see here. And now I'm showing you what happened to the bay window. As you see here, the bay window is now enclosed from the wall, and there are some security measures taken. And of course, eventually it becomes also a security post. So it's something which is again very archetypal for me, but the bay window actually is a turret on a castle. And it's very interesting that the security checkpoints in all the cities are the same. It's like a visual emphasis on that surveillance is very important. And so when you go into each and every residential building, you are checked by security guards with guns, and this is all electrified fence. But also in the barrios, it's the same thing. So you cannot enter the barrio just like this. You have to have an escort who takes you there. And again, these beautiful decorative walls that UCB is full of, it actually allow for ventilation, but also allow for control of the space. That is now turned in the barrios, but also in the former city, in very beautiful, let's say, defense decorations and all that. So each window, if you live in a high-rise apartment building, and your apartment is on the 10th or 15th floor, you must have bars on the windows. It's like a statement about your privacy, but it's the same in the barrios. This actually is taken in the barrios. You can see the playfulness of the design and colors. Yeah, I'm done. This is another, I think that's the last one. This is another example of the fortified architecture decorations. And there is something else which we discussed recently about the meaning of what a Greek column means in the culture. Like I used to live in the US, and I was many times struck by how American universities actually use Greek columns. And for me it was always like a statement about democracy, democratic values. However, in Caracas, this is clearly used, the Greek columns are clearly used in a typal way, again saying that I am a person, I am a tree, and the tree trunk is the first column for the house. So it's actually, in Caracas, these structures are claiming space. So they're occupying the space, they don't talk about shared space. It was also interesting, I was in China 2 weeks ago, and they explained to me that they use Greek columns as representatives of the power. So if you want to talk about economical power, you can do that. And here it's like reclaiming space. These are the last two slides, and actually the one on the left is architecture from one of the Jewish settlements in West Bank. And again, when if you think about how a settlement starts to form on the hills in the West Bank, you have temporary architecture with like a container that lands there and occupies space or marks the space. And then eventually it turns very quickly into, it transforms itself into a sort of a fortress architecture that when I first looked at these images, they reminded me very much about like little city-states, little towns in Tuscany, medieval or Renaissance towns perched on top of the hills, which are also walled or have this protective atmosphere. And of course, as the last point, I'm showing here a gated community, which is an image which was taken actually in the US, but it's the same project as is happening in the West Bank. And it actually shows you the beautiful enclosed world where people that think the same thing like to live together. Now, I was growing up, I was always thinking that the world will all live happily together, but today I think that how the cities are developing is that we are allowed to have our own very enclosed identity, and we can live together very closely to those that really function in a totally different way, or have totally different identity. A good example, once again, I would just like to remind you that the ring roads in the West Bank, they link, I was before referring to the fact that the highways in Caracas are perhaps the last or the ultimate public space in Caracas. But if you think about the West Bank, the link roads that connect the Jewish settlements are totally or more or less disconnected from roads that connect the Palestinian villages. So for me, it's interesting that the two realities that can actually physically live very close together or sort of on the same space can be really divided. So thanks. If you have any questions.
Some people have to go to class, but want to have enough time for people to ask questions.
Yes. I really appreciate this overview of the world. Two questions. One is, what interest do museums actually have in this? Why is a museum interested to have a version of an actual dwelling or structure in a museum? And second, what is actually your role? How are you making your interventions? It would seem, for example, that from a presentation like this, you're a critic in the sense that, on the one hand, telling other people about what's going on in various parts of the world, maybe advocating, and then, of course, you're curating and making the works. Is there some genre that, some way that you would describe what you do? Speaking to art students, would art students then go out and document?
I think it's really not, of course I studied two things, architecture and sculpture, but I really don't think, okay, you have a formal training, but then you just have to decide what is your interest, and I think that's more also appreciated at the very end. Regarding why I built this, I never really planned to make a career out of it, but right now it's going quite well. And for the simple reason that issues about architecture are not something which are now presented as a remote issue, but concerns us all. And it's very typical, this year I was a part of the Venice Biennial with curator Carlos Pasqualdo, and next to me there were 6 architects with their works from Caracas that show their projects. So it's something that not only architects are looking at, but very general public. That's it. So what was your second question?
Well,
I guess doing this. Oh, well, I do many things. I build houses. I write. I make drawings. I make collages. I do many different things, and one complement the other. I think this is great.
So I'm thinking, like in Caracas, would you actually be working there in part as an architect? Actually?
Yeah, I don't know what I am actually.
Okay.
I'm interested in this project. For me, it was very funny that, for instance, I was considered an artist when I came to Caracas, but now the city took the project very seriously, and it was interesting that no other architect thought about it. So it was very simple conceptual idea. If you don't have the water, you build a dry toilet which doesn't need water. But there were like 10,000 architects in Caracas that never thought about it.
Okay.
Yeah, so perhaps, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I mean, what's interesting is this transformation, or the way in which you can move from doing something in a gallery to actually being on site and making a project with somebody. I mean, it's interesting to me.
But you have some opinions about that, because that's not a necessity for you, right? To make it happen. You said this on another occasion, but
Yeah.
doing the project in Caracas doesn't mean that you want to go out and do
I'm not
lots
this kind of person. I'm more like a person who likes to study stuff. The project in Caracas was very unique because we were allowed and supported to stay there 6 months. And I worked closely with another architect. But I'm not this social artist who like to talk with communities. I'm not this kind of
Okay.
But it was a great experience, yeah.
You were talking about the rural imposition on cities, and normally when I think of cities as imposing on nature, and I thought that was, I was wondering if you could elaborate a little more on that, like maybe could you give an example of that here in Chicago, or like maybe talk about the example that you used.
Yeah, actually, I think, the old paradigm was culture versus nature. I think we all forgot about it these days. But what you see, for instance, if you think about cities, they are also growing organisms, and they also grow and they die or whatever. Like for me, I was very taken by the inner city of Detroit. How it looks like and how actually it resists to be revitalized. It's just whatever you do there actually doesn't work very well. I know that they built a huge sports stadium that was supposed to attract people there, but of course people just came for the events and then they went home. So I don't know, probably you know the situation much better in Detroit. So I think that it's the nature now also you can call cities nature. The cities have their own nature. It's not talking only about the barriers, but perhaps unregulated sites, or the eastern part of the U.S. this big metropolis that actually it's never-ending cities. It just has like different pulses. Yes.
I think I may be the only architecture student here, but I wanted to compliment your work, and I really appreciate how you identified the informal architecture and how it can be a precedent, and I think that as a whole people have a lot to learn from that.
What?
I think people have a lot to learn from that, especially in the architecture
well,
field.
Actually, we found out that, okay, as I said before, half of people in these fast-growing cities live like this, so you just cannot dismiss half of the population. So actually there are a lot of very functional things going on. So we try to identify that. And one of these examples was a success of the oral or spoken regulations. Now, we are all used to write papers. So when I own the house, I have papers and content or whatever. And everything that you see in the barrios is spoken regulation. And now, these days, they are also acknowledge the success. Because now that they started to get land titles, it always goes back and forth. But it's interesting that we never thought, or we have never talked about oral regulations as something which is functional and can work very well as informal economy.
I'm curious about your representing certain case study houses in the gallery or the museum, and the requirement that you gave the one example that each time it would be presented, a museum or the gallery would be required to do something new to that. And do you give over that assignment to the individuals at the institution, or do you collaborate with the thinking about that, and do you go to that next site and help do that? I mean, that is, in a sense, that this one case study starts to grow appendages that become more specific to.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I'll tell you, I think it's very important that the person who builds it or the construction team, that they really understand the concept. So I take great care that I, for instance, visit the institution, I talk closely to a person who will build it, but it's not necessary. What I hate is to send a list of materials. I just hate it. So I tell this person, you can choose in parameter, you can choose this and this material, this makes sense, and you can also be inventive and find something else. And then we just exchange a few emails. And then I do come usually one day before the opening or something. Sometimes even before.
But then, this was clear to me, then if that is shown again, does the prior attachment go with it to the next site?
Well, the materials don't travel.
Okay.
Then you commit to do the same thing again, but of course you will not find the same kind of water barrel, you will find different kind of water barrel.
But within your concept, there's research that you've done on how the core unit can expand so that you have the basic electrical core unit and then the water tank can be added, the solar panel, the TV connection or something,
Actually,
and then a room, right? And so when you gave us 2 slides, and you had said that it was the first iteration, and then you showed us the second and the third. From the second to the third, did you tell them the room is what comes?
Now
the roof with the stilts.
Yes, now we just had the shade now. It was more occupation of the land, and now they will build a home now. Yes.
Are you using the term case studies in terms of the 50s case studies houses in California?
No, I don't know about that. It's a case study. It's a term that I use because I always identify something that I'm interested in, and then I say, okay, I will show this in a gallery or in a museum. So I call it a case study.
There's a very famous series of homes done that was sponsored by Arts and Architecture magazine in the 50s in California. So it has a very specific architectural significance.
I never heard about it in Europe, sorry.
Well, the thing about them is that all those were similarly totemic object-like buildings. And I think that possibly one of the problems of translating the gallery work to the city is the city, all the photographs that you show of the city, shows it as a place of great density and activity.
Yes.
Not as a place where there are totemic objects spread around. It's more like a virus than a series of independent cells. Now the gallery, of course, you need, in order to be able to walk around it, you need to have this isolated object, sculptural object. But I'm not so sure that that's really the character of the city as we know it. The city, as we know, is more about living in groups or in kind of continuous.
Exactly, but I do many different things. Like I've been recently making a series of drawings that are talking about the same thing that you're referring to. I think as a physical object, a building that is like a human size is very strong statement, because as a person you react to it not as a text, but it's something which you associate with your own body. So it's a home. You can. It's like a first encounter of a shelter, right?
But in that case, it's much closer to the confessional. I'm more interested in architecture. I'm not interested in the psychology of it at all. This is why I told you that I left always the doors closed, so you can think about the structure, how it looks on the outside. But I do like small
small-scale buildings, yes. Yeah?
So, during your lecture, there's a lot of things unspoken about sort of issues of economy and class. There's, when you go and you're describing not only your projects, but the buildings, the archetypes that you're interested in, these sort of economies of development, of self-sustainability. And so there is a particular sort of reading that occurs of the city at the margins, and when the margins come in. And underneath that is seems to me there's a whole sorts of politics and economy and class. And the only thing that kind of threw me completely off was the very end of the lecture, almost going from those particular sites almost seamlessly into images of development in the West Bank without sort of almost sort of equating these developments. And it just seemed to me that that's where the whole thing kind of fell apart to me, because if these two things could be equated, well, then they must just be formal. It must just be about formal growth and not about
this is very it's very interesting.
And maybe it's just because it's the next phase of a different thought. But I'm just saying, in the end of the lecture, I have those two things put together.
I think I showed it on purpose, because when I had a talk with Ella Weisman like 3 weeks ago in London, we totally agreed that these sort of hysterical architecture archetypes that he and me were showing can be actually applied to the urban imaginary of contemporary cities that we all share. What I showed you was just an extreme example that is very illustrative. Now, I would also like to say that I consider archetypes very interesting, because after, let's say, after modernism, okay, now, this is also, I have personal experience with this. I used to be I live in Ljubljana, which was a part of ex-Yugoslavia, so I know modernist architecture in Belgrade quite well. Everything before the political changes in the 1990s was built in the modernist style, which again tried to visualize democracy, as I said before. Now, what happened was really interesting. After 1990s, nothing was built in modernist style anymore. Just nothing. It was just, wow. It was sort of scary. What emerged were like these typical archetypal buildings, which actually you can also see in the Jewish settlements in the West Bank, like a house is a house is a house. And also turbo architecture. This is actually my friend Srđan Jovanović Weiss, who is an architect based in New York, but he comes from Belgrade. He coined the term together. It comes from the music, turbo music, which actually after the political changes was very popular in Belgrade, which combined folk music with techno. And this is exactly how the houses look like. They show off this archetypal architecture, plus they have these additions of high technology, like a huge satellite dish, or one facade would be all glass, a statement about high technology. So what you have here are these archetypes, turbo architecture and defense architecture. These are the styles that emerged in buildings that are built by residents themselves. As for developers, their vision is to go for gated communities, the same stuff that you see here in the US, the townhouses, enclosed, they look from far away like city walls. I was there, took 10,000 photos, and I've shown you a few examples. But what was your first,
No, just there
is something which I forgot to tell, is that self-sustainability, why I like to talk about it, that eventually empowers individuals. And we usually, traditionally, were thinking that, okay, individual and society always have to come together, And this is also why the society or the city provides infrastructure. But when, for instance, if I walk in Utrecht, in these new developments, I see self-sustainable houses as a show houses, where these developers try to showcase the new neighborhood to future buyers. So they build houses that you as a future owner visit, and they are all self-sustainable. So it's something in the society that really likes about self-sustainability, not only in poor countries, but also in developed countries. What nobody talks about is that when actually you can take about your own energies yourself, you can be self-sufficient. But I don't think it in this hardcore American way of the self-reliance movement. But I do believe that the balance between individual and society can be restructured in a different way. You can actually resell some of your energy that you produce back to the power grid, for instance. I don't know, this is...
It's past 6:30.
Yeah.
Thank you.